Welcome to the first and I would say most essential tutorial on how to game on a budget. Today we'll be looking at Retroarch, which is one of the best emulation tools out there, and it's completely free with no ads and no paid extra content. All you'll need is an Android smartphone, so let's get started. Go to the Google Play Store and search for Retroarch, install it, and open it up. The first thing we'll need to do is turn on advanced settings, so touch the little gear in the bottom, scroll down to user interface, and turn show advanced settings on. The terminology for Retroarch is a little bit confusing, so let me briefly explain it. Your cores are like your system, so like a Game Boy, and your content is like a cartridge. If the content fits with the core, you're going to turn it on and it's going to work just fine. If you try to fit something that isn't made for that core into it, it's like trying to put an N64 cartridge into a Game Boy. Nothing's going to happen. Now that we got that figured out, let's get some content. To get cores, we'll go back to the main menu by hitting the home button on the bottom and use the online updater to download some cores. While we're here, let's ensure that all of Retroarch's assets are up to date, so touch Update Core Info Files, Assets, joypad profiles, and databases. Updating cheats, overlays, and GLSL shaders can be done as well, but they're not something I really use, but I will go over how to use overlays and shaders later. For now, scroll back up and go to Core Updater. There's a long list of cores here. A lot of systems have different emulators. Some of them use high-level emulation, and some use low-level emulation. Low-level emulation has a tendency to work better at the cost of your computer's hardware, but these days most phones are so powerful that it wouldn't really matter. So let's go down and grab a Game Boy emulator for this example. I've always had good luck with Gembat, so let's grab it. But any of them should probably work fine. Hold on the title to see more information since it's cut off in this user interface. If you want, you can just go ahead and download all of the cores for all systems. It doesn't take long, and it's usually what I do anyways. Now we'll need some content. Retroarch does distribute open license software directly through the menu if you go to Online Updater and then Content Downloader. You'll see a lot of systems listed as folders below, and within these folders are free open license software. For this example, we're going to get some software that is not open license, but can be legally used because I own the cartridge. I can't show you how to get it because of the legality of these sites is questionable at best, and they go down and come back up pretty regularly. I don't want this video to get taken down, so I'll just recommend that you find a ROM yourself. It's not hard. For this example, I have it on my computer. So let's go ahead and move it from the computer onto the phone. We'll just copy our ROM and go to our phone in the File Explorer here. I like to keep things organized, so let's make a folder to put our ROMs in. We'll just call it ROMs. Open it up and we'll just drag our ROM into the new folder. Now we can disconnect our phone and go back to Retroarch. The middle icon at the bottom of Retroarch is the playlist section. This is where you'll have your ROMs nicely organized into playlists for each system. Let's click on that. Now we need to choose to scan our ROMs directory. Android file architecture is a little bizarre, but you want to hit parent directory until you end up at the screen with /storage /emulated/0. That's your phone's internal memory. Go in there and you'll find the ROMs folder that we created. Enter it and hit scan this directory. If your ROMs are on an SD card, hit parent directory until you get to the screen with a jumbled name and an emulated folder. The jumbled name is your SD card. Go to it, navigate to the folder with your ROMs, and choose Scan this directory. Go back to your playlist by clicking the middle icon at the bottom. Now we have a Game Boy playlist. If we go into it, our ROM is in there. We just select it, hit Run, and then we have to select a core to assign to it. Let's go with Gembat, and then we run it. And it works. So to get back to the menu, hit the little Retroarch icon in the middle. This brings up the quick menu for the game that has some neat features, like save states and screenshots. Save state captures the state of the emulated computer exactly as it is, and you can return to that exact state at any time. This can be very useful in games that don't have save features, so you don't have to put in a longer, cumbersome password to return to where you were. You can also use it to somewhat cheat a game, save state before a difficult part, and if you fail, just load the state. If we scroll down a bit, we'll find options for the core we're using. I like this a lot on the Game Boy in particular because we can use the many color palettes available for the real hardware. I have mine set up to look like the pea soup green of the original Game Boy because that's what I like, but let's check out another type of Game Boy. Game Boy Pocket had a black and white screen, so now we'll look at it like that. Metroid 2 also had its own internal palette that could be used on a Super Game Boy cartridge for the Super Nintendo. This is more than the Game Boy itself could handle, but the Super Nintendo took over for the coloring and made it look a lot more like the original Metroid on the NES. So let's turn on this SGB coloring and take a look at what that looks like. Normally I'd prefer the original hardware, but I think for these reasons it's one of the best ways to play Game Boy games today. It's even more portable than the original and it's backlit. So let's compare some Game Boys to see the difference. Next to the original DMG Game Boy, it's no contest. The Retroarch is backlit, it's got better contrast, and it's got better refresh rate. The Game Boy Color is virtually the same. No backlight, better contrast, better colors, and better refresh rate. Even next to the front-lit Game Boy Advance SP, there's still a pretty stark contrast. Unfortunately, I do not have the backlit model of the Game Boy Advance SP to compare. We can even further enhance the visuals with shaders. A lot of people like the CRT filter that makes an image look like the old cathode ray tube TVs, or CRT TVs, that we had when these systems were made. Let's go down to shaders and take a look. First, we have to turn it on. We'll load a shader preset and go into the shaders folder. There are a lot of shaders, but let's check out the CRT ones. We'll just choose the first one for demonstration. Feel free to try out any combination of these shaders, but be aware that it can take a toll on your system. Let's go ahead and apply their changes, go back, and resume our game. Now you can see the scan lines of an old CRT TV. Kinda neat. Another nice feature is that you can remap the controls for the whole core or for only the game. This can be super helpful for games that have backwards jump and attack buttons that we've all encountered, weird controls, or just for personal preference. I personally prefer to have my A and B buttons mapped to what would be cross and square on a PlayStation controller. It's just more comfortable of a position for my thumb than going back and forth with the tip, but just the tip. To remap, scroll down to controls. You can ignore most of what's at the beginning since we're only using one controller. The first button listed is what button on your gamepad is used, and the second is which button is being mapped on the emulated hardware. Keep in mind that the default controller has the awful Nintendo buttons where Y is on the X-axis and X is on the Y-axis, A is on the left and B is on the bottom. So I already have mine mapped to my preference of A at the bottom and B on the left. Do what you like and either save the remap file to your core or for your game. Be sure that before you exit, you go back to the home icon at the bottom, select Configuration File, save your current configuration, go back, and then select Quit Retroarch. If you don't do this, you can lose changes that you made to your settings and you'll have to redo them. That's really all you need to know to be able to play the games on your phone. From here, I'll discuss some more things on how to make the user interface look better, how to play more easily, and how to make your collection look nice and pretty. Now, I'm not a fan of touch controls. I need to feel the buttons on my fingers to really be able to play properly. So my first bit of advice would be to get a decent Bluetooth controller. There are tons available and a lot of them are really cheap. I would recommend going for one that isn't necessarily the cheapest because anyone who's played a game on a cheap controller like a Mad Cat knows the feeling of cheap buttons is unpleasant. I got this nice telescoping controller for about $35 on Amazon, and I've beaten it to hell. I've used it so much. It's perfect because it fits in my bag, and if I have to wait somewhere, I can just pull it out and game. The feeling is almost identical to a PlayStation Vita, and I love the way my phone just fits in there. So let's start by making our user interface a little better. I personally can't stand this touch interface. Things get cut off, and touch control is just not something I like. I much prefer the XMB interface that resembles a PSP, PS3, or PS4 menu, and is controlled by the controller instead of touch. To change that, we'll go into the settings gear at the bottom, select drivers, and for our menu, we'll change from the GLUI to XMB. This won't take effect until we restart, so let's go ahead and change some other things before we restart. Go back to settings, go into video and scroll down to screen rotation. Select 90 degrees. This will automatically put Retroarch into a landscape mode, which is much nicer for our new XMB interface. If you're using touch controls, the next part is critical. In your settings, go to on-screen display, on-screen overlay, and uncheck hide overlay in menu. If you don't do this, you will not be able to control your XMB menu and you will have to reinstall Retroarch and start over. You'll have to finish up here using the on-screen controls to save and restart. So we'll use A to select, B to go back, hit B to go back, B again, left to go to playlists, and left again to go to the home menu. Navigate down to save your configuration file, go back with B, and quit Retroarch. Let's restart and check out our new XMB menu. Keep in mind it's going to boot automatically into landscape mode now, so turn your phone. Now our menu looks a lot nicer. Instead of the playlist menu in the middle, we've got these nice playlists on the right side with the icons of the console and little cartridge icons. You can make the touch controls disappear and reappear by hitting the little arrow near the top. If you're using a controller, you can remove them completely by going to Settings, On-Screen Display, On-Screen Overlay, and turning the display overlay off. If you do this, you'll have to create a button combination to return to the menu while in a game. Go to Settings, Input, and scroll down to Menu Toggle Game Combo. L1, R1 Start and Select is a good one because you'll never use that in a game as far as I know. Some of the other combinations will occur and can be a pain when it opens up the menu every time you push that combination. I like to also turn on the menu swap OK and cancel buttons. This just swaps the use of the bottom button and the right button in the menu. If you're used to Nintendo consoles, I would leave it off, but if you're a PlayStation or Xbox user, I would recommend that you turn it on. You can download thumbnails for your games that look really nice when you're scrolling through your playlists. To do this, go to the main menu and select Online Updater. Go to the Thumbnails Updater and select which console you want to download the thumbnails for. Be aware that these packs contain several pictures for each game released on the console and can eat up space on your phone very quickly. For example, if you were to download Atari 2600 images and you had 3 for each cartridge, that would take up about 1,000 times as much space as the entire library of Atari 2600 games. For all of you achievement fans out there, Retroarch does sync with retroachievements.org and has a massive database of games with around 20 to 50 achievements each. It's easy to set up. Just go to retroachievements.org and set up an account, then open up Retroarch and go to Settings, User, Accounts, Retro Achievements, and enter your information. The last thing I want to go over is not at all critical, but is just a way to customize your user interface a little bit more. Go to Settings and scroll down to User Interface. Select Appearance, and there are a lot of things that you can play around with to make your display into something you like. Noodle around with it a bit and find what you like. So now you should have a nice little setup for portable emulation. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe for more tutorials on how to game on a budget. It helps me out a lot. I'll see you next time.